In the third year of their marriage certificate was accidentally soaked and ruined by a spilled cup of coffee. Julian took the damaged document to the county clerk's office to request a replacement. The clerk tapped away at the keyboard for a few moments, then looked up at him, puzzled. "Sir," she said slowly, "your marital status is listed as single." He blinked, confused. "That's not possible. My wife and I registered right here 3 years ago. We were issued an official certificate." The clerk checked again, her expression shifting to something more cautious, almost uncomfortable. "According to the system, you are indeed single. However, Miss Kingsley is marked as married." She hesitated. "Her spouse is registered as Mr. Cashin Vale. Do you know him?" Julian's brain short-circuited. A sharp ringing filled his ears, drowning everything else out. Everyone knew Julian and Aurelia as the perfect couple. Julian was the man she had quietly adored since she was a teenager, the one she used to steal glances at with trembling hands and a racing heart. And Cashin? He was the stand-in. The substitute she found during the 2 years Julian was overseas, because she missed him so much, she couldn't bear the distance. Julian staggered out of the building like a man sleepwalking, the coffee-stained, worthless certificate still clenched in his fist. He got into his car, and just then, his phone buzzed twice. A new message lit up the screen. It was from Aurelia. "I just bailed on an $8 million deal, picked up your favorite roses and steak. I miss you so much. Do you miss me?" He stared at the message for a long time, then let out a laugh. It started small, then shook his whole body. And somewhere between the laughter, tears spilled down his cheeks. She had asked him that same question every day for the past 3 years, always with that sweet, tender tone, like he was the only one in her world. And yet, behind his back, she had already become someone else's lawful wife. His mind spun back to when they were children. He remembered being sick with the flu and missing school. Aurelia, upon learning he wouldn't be there, had burst into tears and refused to go either. She insisted on staying at his house to nurse him. "I'm scared when you're not around," she said. He remembered his 15th birthday, how she stood outside his building all night in the pouring rain, just to be the first to wish him happy birthday when he woke up. He remembered his 18th, the surprise she planned under a sky filled with fireworks. How she threw her arms around him and whispered, "After we graduate college, let's get married. Okay?" And then, when he told her he had to leave for the UK to study, she hugged him tight, eyes red and wet. Her voice trembled as she said, "2 years. I'll give you 2 years. When time's up, I'm coming to get you." He had gone. And while he was away, they video-called nearly every day. There was a time he'd gone 3 days without answering her calls, buried in thesis deadlines and back-to-back papers. When he finally called back, he learned she had been admitted to the hospital for depression. Her eyes were bloodshot on the video call. "I can't live without you," she sobbed. He always comforted her. "I'm almost home. Just a little longer, okay?" The day he returned, he didn't tell her. He wanted it to be a surprise. But when he pushed open the door of the private lounge where she was supposed to be, he found her curled up in the arms of another guy, locked in a passionate kiss. The guy's profile looked eerily familiar. Almost like his own. The bouquet in Julian's hand slipped from his fingers and hit the ground with a hollow thud. He turned and walked away without a word. Aurelia ran after him in a panic, calling over and over. When he wouldn't answer her calls, she flooded him with texts. When he refused to see her, she stood in the pouring rain outside his building, explaining herself again and again. "It's not what you think. You didn't let me visit you. I missed you too much. That's the only reason I found someone who looked like you. I swear, it was just hugs and kisses, nothing more. I know I messed up, but I loved you so much it made me lose my mind." She stayed out in that storm for 3 days and 3 nights, until she collapsed with a fever and had to be hospitalized. Even then, she tried to leave the hospital to see him. That's when he finally gave in. His heart broke all over again, and he forgave her. After that, things went back to the way they used to be. She treated him with the same tenderness, the same fierce devotion. Until after they got married. That was when he noticed her new assistant, Cashin. The very stand-in she swore she had sent away. Once again, she offered an explanation: his parents are in poor health, and he couldn't find a decent job anywhere else. He begged to come back to Northgate City. He applied for the assistant position, and I had no idea it was him. He's actually good at what he does. He made it through multiple rounds of selection. I can't just fire him without reason. And once again, Julian tolerated it. He bit down his pride, bit down his doubts, until all that biting down turned him into a walking, breathing joke. By the time his car turned into the gates of the villa community, everything had finally clicked into place. He took a long breath, ready to walk in and say what needed to be said. But just as his hand touched the door, he heard voices from the living room. It was Aurelia and her friend, Sabrina. "I just got back from the hospital," Sabrina said. "Cashin's fine. Just a few scrapes. You can relax and stay here with Julian." Aurelia was lounging on the couch, legs elegantly crossed. Aurelia frowned and stubbed out the cigarette in Sabrina's hand, her voice cool and clipped. "How many times do I have to say this? No smoking in my house. Julian hates the smell." All right, Sabrina said with a teasing smile. "But seriously, I don't get you. You're obviously crazy about Julian, so why'd you go and file a marriage certificate with Cashin of all people? Be honest, was he ever just a stand-in to you?" The air turned heavy. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then Aurelia spoke, her voice low, muffled by something deeper. "So what if he wasn't? At first, I thought that's all he was, a stand-in. Once Julian came back, I figured I wouldn't need him anymore. But after he was sent away, I started dreaming about him. Almost every night. I couldn't stand not having him around. So I brought him back, as my assistant. I can't live without Julian. But Cashin. I can't live without him either. Julian is the one I get to love in the light, the one I get to call my husband. Cashin, he can only exist in the shadows. Giving him a legal title, so what?" Sabrina sighed. "Aren't you scared Julian might find out? You know how he is. If he ever learns the truth, even if you dropped dead in front of him, he wouldn't look back." Aurelia paused, her gaze deepening. "Then I'll make sure he never finds out." Just outside the door, Julian stood frozen, blood drained from his veins. He thought he'd storm in and demand answers, make her explain everything to his face. But now, he couldn't even move his lips. So this was what it felt like. Real pain. The kind that carved straight through your chest, scooped out a piece of your heart, and left the rest of it still beating. He thought of how, just this morning, Aurelia had risen on tiptoe to kiss his forehead before leaving the house. How every time she came home drunk from a business dinner, she collapsed in his arms, whispering, "Baby, I can't live without you." How she used to press his cold hands to her chest and say, "It only beats for you." All of it. A lie. On the way back here, he'd still wondered if maybe there was some kind of reason, some buried heartache that might explain it all. But now he knew. She didn't have a tragic excuse. She didn't choose one or the other. She just wanted both. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too. Fine. So she was afraid of him finding out? Then he'd show her what it really meant, to never, ever look back. Julian turned around and walked away. And he did two things. First, he filed the paperwork to erase every record tying him to Northgate, his address, his licenses, every trace. Second, he changed his name. The clerk told him it would all be processed within 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks' time, even if Aurelia searched heaven and earth, she would never find him again. Julian turned and walked away. His phone buzzed non-stop inside his bag, call after call, message after message. All from Aurelia. He didn't check. Didn't respond. By the time he got home, the sky had already gone dark. Aurelia was standing in the living room. The moment she saw him, she hurried over, the worry in her eyes unmistakable. "Baby, where did you go? I came home and you weren't here. I waited for hours, I was this close to turning the whole city upside down looking for you." And she sounded genuinely concerned. Julian stared at her, dazed, as if his heart had been caught in a fist and squeezed tight. He remembered high school, how she had once skipped a math competition and come running back when he didn't answer her text for over an hour, terrified something had happened to him. She had loved him like that. So desperately. So fiercely. And yet, the love she gave him wasn't the only one she knew how to give. His throat tightened, a pressure building in his chest that made it hard to breathe. But when he finally spoke, his voice was calm. "I just went out to buy a few things. Forgot to tell you. Sorry." She let out a relieved sigh and melted into his arms. "Don't apologize. I'm not mad. I was just worried." She kissed his cheek, soft and affectionate. "All right, love. Didn't you say 2 days ago you were craving steak? Let me go make you some, okay?" With that, she let go of him and turned toward the kitchen. Julian stood by the door, silently watching her. She had rolled up the sleeves of her blouse. Her long fingers moved skillfully as she sliced the vegetables, her profile bathed in the warm, golden kitchen light, serene and elegant. He suddenly remembered, 3 years ago, just after he returned from overseas, he'd landed in the hospital from a stomach condition, years of bad eating habits finally catching up to him. Aurelia, who had never touched a stove in her life, took a full month off and trained under a private chef, just to learn how to cook for him. He remembered the day she had a major international video conference scheduled at the same time she was supposed to make lunch. She set her tablet up in the kitchen and joined the meeting while sautéing vegetables. The executives on the call were stunned speechless. That was the kind of love she had once given him. And yet, her phone rang. Julian saw her glance at the screen. Her expression shifted, just slightly. She set down the knife and wiped her hands on a towel. Something urgent came up at work. "I need to head out for a bit," she said casually, untying her apron. She leaned in to kiss his forehead like nothing had changed. "I've made 3 dishes. They're still warm, don't wait up." Julian didn't reply. He just nodded. Once she was gone, he walked to the dining table. Steam still rose from the food. But as he looked down at the meal she had lovingly prepared, a sharp pain bloomed in his chest. It was hard to breathe. Because he had seen the caller ID. It was Cashin. No, he wasn't going to sit down and eat like a good husband. He grabbed his coat, stepped out the door, and hailed a car. He was going to follow her. Of course. Aurelia hadn't gone to the office. She'd gone to the hospital. In the VIP wing, the entire floor had been cleared. The hallway was eerily quiet except for a handful of doctors and nurses stationed outside one of the private rooms, faces taut with nerves. At the center of it all stood Dr. Howard, the hospital director, bent at the waist, practically groveling. "We're terribly sorry, Miss Kingsley," he said, his voice low and apologetic. "It was our lapse in oversight that led to Mr. Vale slipping in the bathroom. We'll assign extra aides immediately, this will never happen again." Aurelia's expression was cold, her voice glacial. "If there's a next time, you won't need to worry about staffing. This hospital will be permanently closed." Yes, of course." Howard nodded frantically. We'll take every precaution. Around the corner, Julian stood still as stone, fingernails digging into the palms of his hands. Sabrina had said it was just a few scrapes. Yet here she was, renting out an entire hospital wing. And now that something had actually happened, she looked ready to bring the whole place down. The door to the room creaked open. Cashin was propped weakly against the pillows, pale as paper. Aurelia rushed to his side and took his hand. "Where else does it hurt?" she asked, her voice taut with worry. Cashin clutched her fingers like a wounded pup, eyes glassy with guilt and need. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "God, I'm such an idiot. It was bad enough getting hit by a car, now I can't even take a damn shower without falling. You were supposed to be with Mr. Ashbourne tonight. What if he starts to suspect something? This is all my fault." "Don't say that," she cut him off gently, almost chiding. "Just focus on healing. I'll stay with you for the next few days, all right?" Cashin's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "But what about Mr. Ashbourne?" "I'll take care of it," she said, her tone unreadable. "That's not your concern." Then, as if offering comfort, she added, "We're married. Of course I'll stay. That's what a wife does, isn't it?" Julian felt the blood freeze in his veins. Married. So that was it. No more hiding. No more euphemisms. But before he could even process what he'd just heard, he saw something that nearly stopped his heart. Aurelia slipped off the St. Christopher medallion bracelet from her wrist, one she'd worn every day for as long as he could remember, and gently fastened it around Cashin's wrist. "And one more thing," she whispered, "stop saying you bring bad luck. This medal's been with me for 7 years. It's kept me safe through everything. From now on, it'll protect you too." Cashin's eyes welled up with tears. He reached out and pulled her into a trembling embrace. Julian watched from the hallway, his vision blurring. Like the ocean had risen without warning and swallowed him whole. That medallion. It wasn't just a trinket. Julian had received it on his 18th birthday, after walking miles through a violent storm, his clothes soaked through, the wind lashing like a whip. He dropped to his knees on the freezing stone steps of an old countryside church and prayed until sunrise. Only then had the priest come out and pressed the St. Christopher medal into his hands. When he returned home that morning, his body was drenched, his knees and palms scraped raw and bleeding. Aurelia had taken one look at him and burst into tears. "Julian, are you insane?" she cried, throwing her arms around him, voice trembling. "Who told you to do something so dangerous?" But he had only smiled and slipped the medal onto her wrist. "The priest said St. Christopher will keep you safe, walk with you your whole life." She had kissed him, gently, and whispered, "Then I'll wear it for the rest of mine." And she had. For the next 7 years, through the most elegant galas and the quietest midnight hours, that medallion never left her wrist. Until now. Until today. She had taken it off, with her own hands, and fastened it around another man's. Julian felt like his heart was being carved open with a dull blade, slow, brutal, merciless. Even breathing hurt. So this is what she meant by forever. 7 years. That was her whole forever. He turned and walked away, his footsteps unsteady, as if the floor beneath him had turned to clouds. By the time he got home, it was late. The moment he stepped inside, his phone buzzed again. "Aurelia. Something came up at work. I have to fly to France for a few days. Don't be mad, I'll make it up to you when I get back." Julian stared at the screen, fingers hovering above the keyboard, trembling. He typed. "Are you going on a business trip, or spending a few days with your husband?" Then, slowly, he deleted it. Word by word. His vision blurred. A tear hit the screen. He spent the rest of the night packing. Passports. IDs. Bank cards. Anything that could tie him to his name, to this place, to this life, he folded it into a suitcase. 3 days passed. Then Aurelia came home. She pushed open the front door, holding a massive bouquet of roses in one arm and a bag of groceries in the other. Her smile was soft and affectionate. "Baby, I'm home." Julian stood in the center of the living room, silently watching her. She walked up, set the flowers and groceries down on the table, and reached for him. "Work's been insane. I had no choice but to go to France. I wouldn't have left you that long otherwise. Don't be mad, okay?" He stepped aside, just enough to avoid her embrace. His voice was flat, steady. "I'm not mad. Do what you need to do." She paused, clearly surprised. Then she laughed lightly and leaned in, as if trying to lighten the mood. "Well, I'm done working. Everything's settled. From now on, my only job is making it up to you." She reached for his hand, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I've got a surprise planned for you." Before he could say anything, she pulled him toward the door and led him into the car. 30 minutes later, the car pulled up in front of a grand concert hall. Julian stepped inside, immediately struck by the sight. The entire venue had been rented out. Every seat was filled, the space buzzing with hushed chatter as eyes turned to watch them enter. "Miss Kingsley really went all out this time," someone whispered. "She booked the entire hall just for Mr. Ashbourne. I heard she flew in his favorite orchestra from the UK, they'll be playing nothing but his favorite pieces all day. That ensemble's rates have skyrocketed. This setup probably cost no less than $50 million. That's nothing. Everyone knows how crazy she is about spoiling her husband." Julian stood under the brilliant chandelier lights, surrounded by admiration, envy, applause. Aurelia looked up at him with a soft, devoted smile. But inside, his heart felt submerged in ice water. Numb. Aching. She gave him grandeur and romance. But gave someone else her name on a marriage certificate. She made sure the world saw him as the man she adored, while another man lived on paper as her lawful husband. He took his seat in the VIP section. The orchestra began to play, notes drifting like silk through the room. Aurelia sat beside him, brushing his shoulders gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you cold?" He shook his head, but his brow furrowed involuntarily as a sharp cramp twisted in his stomach. Aurelia caught it instantly. "Is it your stomach again?" He nodded slightly, discomfort rising in waves. She pressed her warm hand to his abdomen, concern etched across her face. "Is it bad? Do you want to go home?" He shook his head again. She hesitated, but finally reached for her phone. "I'll call Gavin to bring your medicine." And for the next 20 minutes, her full attention never left him. She leaned over now and then to check if he needed water, or an extra blanket, or a break. She spoke to him with the kind of care that once made him believe he was the only man she'd ever loved. Then footsteps approached, quick, light, urgent. A soft voice, "Miss Kingsley, I've got the meds." Julian and Aurelia turned their heads at the same time. It wasn't Gavin. It was Cashin. He held a small paper bag, his hair damp with rain, complexion still pale. Aurelia's face immediately darkened. "You just recovered. Who told you to come?" "I asked Gavin, not you." Cashin bit his lip, voice hoarse. "Gavin was in a project meeting. I didn't want Mr. Ashbourne to be in pain, and I didn't want you to wait." He stepped forward, cradling the paper bag like something sacred. "It's raining outside. I forgot an umbrella. But don't worry, I kept everything dry. Not a single drop touched it." Aurelia's expression flickered, frustration, guilt, restraint, something else. She said nothing for a moment. Then finally, she took the bag, turned to Julian, and said gently, "Let's go take your meds." Julian said nothing. He swallowed the pills and excused himself to the restroom. But when he came back out, Aurelia, who had said she'd wait for him right outside, was gone. He was just about to leave when he heard a sound, a faint, muffled noise, coming from the restroom next door. He turned toward it instinctively, stepping closer. And then he saw. Aurelia was pressed up against the bathroom sink, Cashin's body flush against hers as they kissed, deeply, hungrily. She murmured in protest, half-hearted and breathless, "Stop. Julian's still waiting for me." "But I haven't seen you in so long." Cashin's voice was thick with longing, low and hoarse. "It's fine, I know I still don't mean anything to you. Even after bringing you medicine in the rain, for Ashbourne, I know. I know your eyes are only for him." His voice cracked at the end, trembling with unshed emotion. "I just wanted to make you happy." Aurelia cupped his face, lips finding his again with even more tenderness. Her kiss deepened, slow and indulgent. Cashin whimpered softly. She laughed under her breath, voice warm and teasing. "Already getting excited?" Cashin flushed and tried to pull away. "You should go back to Mr. Ashbourne. I can take care of it myself." "Oh," she said, her voice playful and sweet, her hand sliding lower. "And how exactly would you do that?" "Some things," she whispered, "just feel better when a woman does them for you." Then came the rustle of fabric. Cashin's sharp, restrained breaths. Aurelia's soft coaxing, like a lullaby laced with sin. "Good boy," she purred. "I know you've missed me." Outside the door, Julian felt something inside him rupture, like his soul had been split in two, his body barely keeping him upright. He thought of their first kiss. They were 18, standing under a sky lit with fireworks. She had looked up at him with wide, hopeful eyes and whispered, "Can I kiss you?" He'd nodded, blushing. She rose on tiptoe, kissed him like he was made of glass, like the smallest crack might shatter him. He thought of their first night together. How careful he'd been, hesitant and afraid to hurt her. But she had only smiled, gently climbed onto his lap, pressed herself against him. She'd guided his hands, helped him let go. Told him he was the only one who ever made her feel safe enough to surrender. And now she was in a public restroom, using her fingers to pleasure another man. "Aurelia. You've betrayed me so completely." His heart felt like it was being torn apart, ripped down the middle. He stumbled backward, shoulder crashing into a decorative vase by the wall. It fell and shattered. "Who's there?" Aurelia's voice shot out, sharp and cold. She rushed outside. The hallway was empty. Except for an orange cat crouched in the corner, watching her with wary eyes. "Looks like it was just a cat," Cashin said softly as he stepped out behind her. "You should go back to Ashbourne. I'll catch a cab home later." Aurelia frowned. "In this rain?" "Absolutely not. You're staying with me." Cashin hesitated. "But, what about Ashbourne?" Aurelia stepped closer, looped her arms around his neck, and whispered, "Who's your wife?" Cashin dropped his gaze, voice quiet and resigned. "You are. Then listen to me." She took his hand and led him back toward the concert hall. When they walked back in, Julian was still seated in the same spot, calm, motionless, quietly listening to the music. Aurelia exhaled in relief. She led Cashin to the seat beside him and offered a casual explanation. "Baby, it's pouring outside. He likes live music too, so I told him to stay." Julian gave a soft mm. He didn't call her out. He didn't need to. The concert continued, and Aurelia returned to fussing over him, adjusting the AC, brushing non-existent lint off his coat, whispering if he needed to leave early and rest. But Julian knew. Her left hand remained laced with Cashin's the entire time. And he remembered the first time they ever held hands. He was 16. It had been snowing that night, the sky dusted with white. She had snuck over the wall to his house, her cheeks red with cold, her fingers icy and trembling. She looked up at him and smiled. "My hands are freezing. Will you warm them for me?" He'd laughed and scolded her for being shameless. What kind of girl says that? But still reached out and took her hands. She immediately tightened her fingers around his, and neither of them let go. Back then, her eyes held no one else. Now, she was holding his hand. And someone else's. A tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. Aurelia noticed instantly. She reached up and brushed it away with the pad of her thumb. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. Julian smiled faintly. "The music, it's just really moving." Aurelia gave a low chuckle, her voice affectionate. "You're always so sentimental, aren't you?" He said nothing. Just let her wipe away the tears she didn't know she caused. When the concert ended and the audience began to thin out, Aurelia stopped him from leaving. Suddenly, several stagehands began wheeling in instruments, grand pianos, cellos, violins, each one more exquisite than the last. "You said once that these were beautiful," Aurelia said with a smile. "So I bought them. All of them." She looked almost proud. A nearby staff member chimed in enthusiastically, "Mr. Ashbourne, Miss Kingsley went to great lengths for these pieces. Some came from private collectors at premium auction prices, others were temporarily loaned from museums." Cashin stood nearby, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. Julian's lips parted. He was just about to speak. When Cashin, almost childlike, reached out and tugged a nearby decorative cord. "What's this?" "Don't touch that," a staffer cried, panic flashing in his voice. But it was too late. A low mechanical rumble rolled overhead. Then a thunderous crash. In an instant, the massive lighting rig and sound equipment above came unhinged and plummeted toward the stage. Aurelia didn't think, she lunged, grabbing Cashin and throwing both of them to the floor, shielding him with her body. Julian stood frozen. He saw the metal framework falling toward him, and for a split second, it was as if time stopped. She saved him. She saved someone else. Not him. The crash landed like a hammer. Pain exploded through his body as the rig slammed into him, driving him down. He fell into darkness, the wet warmth of his own blood spreading beneath him. Somewhere above the ringing in his ears, he could hear her scream his name. Julian. But he knew. The man in her arms wasn't him. Julian dreamed for a long time. In it, Aurelia was 14 again, still in her school uniform, a bruise at the corner of her mouth, but grinning, wild and fearless. He sat beside her, dabbing ointment on her face, eyes rimmed with tears. "Are you out of your mind?" he snapped. "You're a girl. Why would you pick a fight with those boys?" She raised an eyebrow, utterly unbothered. "They were bullying you. That's not okay." Then she tilted her chin up, eyes blazing with defiance and clarity. "Yeah, I'm a girl. So what? You're my future husband. As long as I'm here, you're not allowed to get hurt. Not even a scratch." In the dream, Julian broke down crying. He held her tight and whispered, "Why are you always so good to me?" But she didn't seem to hear. She just smiled and turned, fingers laced through his, leading the 14-year-old version of him into the distance. The image dissolved, ripped away. And suddenly he was back in the present. Watching Aurelia throw herself over Cashin, shielding him, while Julian's own blood soaked his vision. His eyes flew open. His pillow was damp with tears. And before he could gather his breath, he heard a voice, soft, choked with guilt. Cashin. Sitting in the hospital room, face buried in his hands. "This is all my fault," he whispered. "I shouldn't have pulled that cord. If I hadn't touched it, Mr. Ashbourne wouldn't have gotten hurt. I'll do anything. Anything you ask. Just tell me what to do. Aurelia's voice came next, quiet and laced with something between exasperation and tenderness. Anything? Cashin nodded fervently. Yes. I messed up, I should take responsibility. I won't be able to sleep otherwise. Aurelia gave a soft laugh and wrapped her arms around him. Then call me wife. Cashin froze. What? Say it. He looked away, then murmured, barely audible, wife. She ran her fingers through his hair, her voice gentle and coaxing. Since you're calling me that, then you do as I say. I'll handle this my way. You don't need to worry about it anymore. Cashin nodded and left the room. Julian had been awake the entire time. He'd seen it all. His hand brushed the water glass on the nightstand. It toppled and hit the floor with a sharp crack. Smash. Aurelia whipped around, and only then realized he was awake. She rushed to his bedside, eyes wide with concern. Are you okay? Does anything hurt? She took his hand in both of hers, remorse flickering in her voice. I'm sorry. It was chaos. I couldn't see clearly. I thought you were someone else. Julian shut his eyes. He didn't call her out. Didn't say, I saw you. Didn't scream, you knew exactly who you were saving. He only asked one thing, in a voice too calm to be natural. Where's Cashin? Aurelia stiffened. She misunderstood, assuming he wanted to confront Cashin. He didn't mean to, she said quickly. Yes, it was his fault, but I already punished him. Harshly. Julian thought of what he'd just witnessed. That was punishment? Calling her, wife? Well then. That was harsh. He didn't respond. Didn't accuse her. Didn't demand an explanation or unleash fury. He just said, quietly. I'm hungry. Aurelia froze. She stared into his eyes, and finally noticed something was off. He was too calm. Calm like still water. But not the peaceful kind. The dead kind. She opened her mouth, as if to say something, but Julian cut her off with a quiet, steady voice. I'm hungry. That broke her train of thought completely. She blinked, hesitated, then forced a gentle smile. I'll go get you something right away, okay? Just wait for me. She grabbed the car keys and rushed out the door. The moment it clicked shut, Julian's tears spilled over, hot, unstoppable. But he wiped them away almost immediately. He turned his face to the window. Sunlight streamed in, harsh and blinding, but it didn't reach him. Love screams. Hate lashes out. But this was neither. He felt nothing now. No love. No hate. Just, nothing at all. Aurelia cleared her entire schedule. She stayed by his side in the hospital, day and night. She fed him meals herself, dabbed ointment on his injuries, even woke up at night just to check if he'd kicked off the blanket. But Julian remained silent. Calm. Too calm. Then came discharge day. To cheer him up, Aurelia organized a grand celebration. The ballroom glittered in gold. Champagne flowed in towers. The guests were polished, elegant, glasses clinking, laughter echoing. Admiration filled the air. Miss Kingsley dotes on Mr. Ashbourne like no one else. I heard every one of those gifts is limited edition. He's so lucky. Some men really do get the fairy tale. Julian stood in the center of it all. Expressionless. Aurelia finally couldn't take it. She pulled him into a quiet corner and whispered. You're still mad, aren't you? Her fingers brushed along the inside of his wrist, coaxing, pleading. I swear I didn't know. I really thought it was you. What do I have to do for you to forgive me? She asked. Tell me. I'll do it. Anything. Julian looked at her for a long moment. Then, he smiled. All right. Fire Cashin. Her face shifted, just slightly. Her voice softened. Julian, his family's struggling. His parents are sick. Do we really need to be so cruel? Julian just stared at her. You just said you'd do anything. But the moment it touched Cashin, everything changed. He opened his mouth to speak again. And then her phone rang. Cashin. His voice burst through the speaker, frantic, desperate. Ms. Kingsley, please help me. Someone sent a gang after me, they said they're going to kill me. Aurelia's face drained of color. What? Where are you? But the call cut out. She tried calling back. Nothing. Over and over, straight to voicemail. Then she turned to Julian. Her eyes scanned his face, panicked, searching, and then doubt. Suspicion. Anger, barely restrained. Where is he? She asked, voice tight. Still calm. Still giving him the benefit of some doubt. But barely. Julian's chest twisted. She didn't even ask if he did it. She didn't need to. She'd already decided. She didn't believe him. Not enough to check. Not enough to pause. Just, where is he? His voice trembled. You think it was me? It's not that, Aurelia said, rubbing her temples. It's just, he said someone was after him. So? Julian's tone cracked, brittle. You think I sent them? She went quiet for a moment, then said softly, I'm not accusing you. But it's urgent, Anne. One phone call, Julian cut in with a bitter laugh, his eyes glassy with disbelief, and you panic like this? Aurelia, what exactly is your relationship with him? Her brow furrowed deeper. Julian, this could be life or death. Can we not do this right now? Don't make it about jealousy. Jealousy? His voice was a whisper now, barely audible over the blood pounding in his ears. You think that's what this is? Aurelia took a deep breath, tried to soften her tone. There's nothing between us, but if he's really in danger, just tell me, was it you? It wasn't me, Julian said, cutting her off sharply. Each word came out like a blade, cold and clean. This is the last time I'll say it. I don't know where he is. I didn't send anyone after him. She stared at him. Her agitation was building, fast. Seconds passed. Cashin's phone stayed silent. No signal. No updates. And finally, she snapped. She lunged forward, grabbed Julian's wrist with so much force it felt like bone might crack beneath her grip. I told you, I already punished him. Why are you still doing this? She hissed. You kill someone, you think there won't be consequences? I don't have time for this. Where is Cashin? Julian's face went pale from the pain, but he held his ground. I don't know, he shouted. Ask me 100 times, it won't change the answer. That did it. Aurelia's fury exploded. Julian. I don't even know who you are anymore. She shoved him, hard. Crash. He stumbled backward, his lower back slamming into the edge of the table. His forehead clipped a sharp metal corner of the centerpiece, blood sprang instantly from the gash. Gasps echoed through the room. Ms. Kingsley. Mr. Ashbourne's hurt. But Aurelia didn't turn around. Didn't even pause. She stormed out, phone to her ear, barking orders into the receiver. Pull all surveillance. Track Cashin's last location. Now. Julian gripped the edge of the table, slowly straightening up. Blood trickled down the side of his face, warm and sticky, but he barely felt it. This pain? It was nothing. Not compared to what was happening inside. He stared in the direction she'd gone, dazed, silent. Then, suddenly, he laughed. Of course she didn't care. Why would she? Her whole world now revolved around Cashin. Just like it once revolved around him. Someone rushed forward, trying to help. More hands followed, reaching for him. But he shook his head, gently pushing them away. And then he walked out, alone. Out of the ballroom. Out of the lies. Out of whatever love had once lived between them. Boom! Just as he stepped outside, a thunderous crash erupted behind him. Julian turned around. The neon sign that had hung above the center of the ballroom, bold, glowing, proud, now lay shattered on the marble floor. Aurelia and Julian, forever. The letters were broken, glass tubing sparking, twisted into two jagged halves. He stared at the wreckage. And then, slowly, he laughed. And laughed. Until the tears blurred his vision. Aurelia, you're forever. Turns out it didn't last very long at all. He walked home alone. No one followed. No one called after him. Back at the apartment, Julian silently cleaned the gash on his forehead, then pulled out a stack of cardboard boxes. He began packing. The action figures she'd gifted him. The ring. The wristwatch. The handwritten cards. Their photo albums. Every piece of her. One by one, he carried the boxes down to the garbage bins outside. Trip after trip. Until nothing was left. On the last trip, a gust of wind swept through the street, carrying fine snowflakes that brushed against his cheeks like icy needles. He stood beneath the streetlight and let out a hollow laugh. What used to be cherished memories were now just garbage at the bottom of a dumpster. The moment he turned, a sack was thrown violently over his head. Before he could react, a sharp pain exploded at the base of his neck. And everything went black. When he came to, he was still in the sack. Hands tied tightly behind his back. A rag shoved into his mouth so deep he could barely breathe. Through the coarse weave of the fabric, he could make out just enough. Aurelia and Cashin sat on a high-backed leather couch. Around them stood several guards, tall, armed, and tense. One of them, Darius, stood at attention. "Ms. Kingsley," he said, respectful and firm, "we got him. This is the ringleader, Ashbourne's guy, the one who sent thugs after Mr. Vale." Cashin clutched Aurelia's hand, looking up at her timidly. "Maybe we let it go," he murmured. "You got there in time. I didn't actually get hurt." Aurelia laughed, low and cold. "No." Her fingers brushed tenderly across Cashin's face, her voice suddenly sweet, eerily so. "I can't bring myself to hurt Julian. But if he dares lay a finger on you, I have to give you justice. If this is the man he sent, then I'll make an example of him. Let him be the warning." Julian's blood turned to ice. It hit him all at once. The whole thing had been a setup. Cashin staged the attack. Faked the panic. Then paid off some lowlifes to abduct him, Julian, and convinced Aurelia that he was the thug. Just to have her, unknowingly, punish the man who once meant everything to her. He thrashed in the sack, muffled sobs and growls rising from his gagged mouth, desperate to shout her name. But the cloth held firm. Cashin let out a soft, performative sigh. "Then, just don't go too hard. He's still Mr. Ashbourne's man." Aurelia's eyes turned to ice. "Too hard? No. He touched you. That's unforgivable. I'll make sure he learns what it means to wish he were dead." The next second, Julian was dragged onto a platform. Beneath him, a pool, at least 30 feet deep. The icy water shimmered under harsh, sterile light, like a mirror for the dead. Still wrapped in the sodden sack, arms bound, he was shoved hard off the edge. Thud. The impact split the silence. Cold water exploded around him, crashing against his chest like a wrecking ball. The sack sucked in water instantly. The weight dragged him down with the force of an anchor. Freezing water surged into his nose, his mouth, his throat. His lungs screamed. His vision darkened as panic shot through every nerve. He twisted instinctively, convulsing in agony. "Help, help me." But the plea was lost in the roar of bubbles. The rope tightened like a noose. The sack grew heavier and heavier, yanking him downward like lead. He fought against the bindings, but every movement made the knots dig deeper. Tighter. Tighter. Until he couldn't breathe. Just when consciousness started to fade, the rope snapped taut. And he was yanked violently from the depths. Gasp. He coughed and choked, vomiting blood-tinged water, convulsing as air clawed its way back into his lungs. But before he could recover, they shoved him in again. And again. And again. Every plunge felt like being hurled into a frozen abyss. Every retrieval like having his skin peeled from muscle, nerve by nerve. Over and over. Endless. Torturous. Julian's vision blurred. The world shrank to a high-pitched ringing and the fire raging in his chest. His lungs burned so fiercely, it felt like they might burst. He didn't know how many times he was pulled back up. Didn't know how many times he begged for death behind a gag. Until, finally, Cashin's voice broke the loop. "Enough, Aurelia. Please, don't hurt him anymore." But Aurelia only scoffed. "Not yet." A guard handed her a metal rod, solid, gleaming, cruel. She walked up to Julian's battered body, now slumped on the tiles like a drowned animal. "You lay a hand on my man. There's a price for that." Crack. The first blow landed on his back, cracking across his spine like a whip of steel. Julian's body arched violently, as if struck by lightning. A guttural sound, muffled and raw, escaped through the cloth stuffed in his mouth. Crack. 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 One strike after another. Unrelenting. Each hit crushed deeper. Each hit thundered into bone. His ribs screamed. His nerves sizzled. Blood trickled from his mouth, down his chin, and dripped onto the floor. 99 blows. She counted them. Delivered each one with her own hands. By the end, he couldn't feel the pain anymore. Couldn't feel anything at all. His vision turned gray, his limbs limp. It was as if his body had been chewed to pulp and left in pieces. When the final blow came, he collapsed completely. His body sprawled in a widening pool of blood. His clothes soaked. The tiles beneath him stained deep red. And then... crunch. She lifted the heel of her sharp leather boot. And ground it down, slowly, mercilessly, right over his exposed fingers. The sound of cracking bone was unmistakable. Julian's whole body spasmed from the pain, but no scream came. He couldn't make a sound. Only then did Aurelia step back, satisfied. She turned and melted into Cashin's arms. Her long fingers gently threaded through his damp, tousled hair. "Did that scare you?" she asked sweetly. "It's over now. No one's ever going to bother you again." She waved a hand toward Darius, like dismissing trash. "Throw him back where he came from." And with that, she walked away, Cashin in tow, her heel squelching through the blood on the floor. The rag in Julian's mouth finally loosened. He gasped for air, lips cracked and shaking, then used the last of his strength to call out. "Aurelia." It came out broken, barely louder than a dying whisper. But it took everything he had. She stopped. Just for a moment. But Cashin suddenly swayed against her, groaning faintly. "My head, it hurts," he whispered, slumping into her shoulder. Immediately, her attention snapped away. She gripped his hand, panic creeping into her voice. "I'm taking you to the hospital. Right now." And she walked off, never once turning around. Julian stared after her. And then, he laughed. Quiet, ragged, delirious laughter. It shook through him. Blood mixed with tears as they slipped down his face. All it would have taken was a glance. Just one. If she had looked back, she would have seen the man lying broken on the ground was the same one she once swore to protect with her life. But she didn't. Cashin filled her vision now. Filled every part of her. When he regained consciousness, Julian was lying on the cold marble floor of some unfamiliar villa. Soaked. Broken. Everything ached, like his entire skeleton had been crushed and pieced back together with fire. He forced himself upright. Every movement split his back open again. The pain was blinding. His hands were swollen, bruised to deep purple. The fractures in his fingers throbbed like open wounds. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He reached for it, trembling. 2 messages. The first, from Aurelia. "Baby, I'm sorry for snapping at you. I just didn't want you to make a mistake. I'll be staying at the hospital to take care of Cashin for a few days. Once he's better, I'll come home to you." Julian stared at the screen for a long time. Then, he laughed again. Tears welled up in his eyes. How absurd. She had nearly killed him with her own hands. And she still had the gall to call him baby. She didn't even realize he'd been missing. The second message was from the civil registry. "Mr. Ashbourne, your request to deregister and change your identity has been approved. It is now officially in effect." Julian gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. His breath hitched. But this time, it wasn't from pain. He could finally leave. He forced himself to stand. Then, slowly, he changed into clean clothes and picked up the suitcase he'd packed long ago. Everything that still belonged to him, he took. Everything but 2 things. The first, a matching necklace Aurelia gave him when she turned 18. Inside the pendant was a micro-surveillance device. Back then, she smiled and said, "Julian, I want to know what you're doing every second of the day." He had thought it was sweet. Now, it felt like a curse. She probably hadn't checked it in years. But if she had, she would have seen that it was her who pushed him off that high platform. Her who beat him 99 times. Her who crushed his fingers beneath the heel of her shoe. The second, a stack of love letters she wrote when she was chasing him. Pages yellowed with age, the handwriting still delicate, the voice still achingly young. "You wore a white shirt today. I thought I was going to die from how fast my heart was beating. Let's get married the day I graduate, okay? I can't wait a second longer. I'll love you my whole life. Only you." Julian ran his fingers over the ink, over her teenage promises. He thought of her at 18, teary-eyed, hugging him tight. "I can't live without you." How many sleepless nights had he spent memorizing those words? Now, they were laughable. He placed the necklace and the letters on the coffee table. Then, without hesitation, he turned around and walked out. Before stepping through the door, he dropped his phone into the trash can. Along with every yesterday that had once meant something. From this moment forward, the Julian who cried over Aurelia, no longer existed. The plane lifted off the runway, soaring into a dark, indifferent sky. Julian looked out the window, watching the city shrink into a blur of lights. For just a second, he saw her. 18 years old, standing above the clouds, smiling like nothing had ever gone wrong. Then a sharp pain ripped through his ribs. The vision shattered. He bit down hard on his lower lip. The taste of blood flooded his mouth. "Sir? Are you all right?" The woman seated beside him lowered her magazine, eyes narrowing as she took him in. Julian shook his head and pulled his scarf higher, burying his face in the cheap synthetic fabric, still damp with the mildew stench of the basement it came from. "I'm fine," he whispered. "Just a little air-sick." Evelyn studied him quietly. The coat he wore was one size too big. The ring mark on his left finger hadn't faded. His right hand was twisted, wrong somehow, like it had healed in the dark without ever setting right. But the worst part? Even in the warmth of the 78-degree cabin, he was still trembling. "I'm a doctor," Evelyn said, offering him a tissue. "You don't look well." Julian took the tissue, and as he reached for it, she noticed the bruises on the inside of his wrist, deep, distinct, and unmistakably patterned. Not random. Not domestic violence. This was trained restraint. Evelyn instantly knew, this wasn't someone who just had a rough fight at home. "Thank you," Julian murmured, crushing the tissue in his palm without using it. He couldn't leave evidence. Not now. Not when he was this close. As long as the plane landed, Aurelia could tear the world apart, and she still wouldn't find him. Then a sharp, stabbing pain erupted in his side, like a blade slicing from inside out. His vision blackened as something warm spilled from his nose. He reached up reflexively. His fingertips came away sticky. Red. Blood. Evelyn unbuckled her seatbelt in one swift motion. "We need emergency medical aid, now." Julian's blurred vision caught glimpses of her hands, deft and precise, unbuttoning his shirt to check his chest. Funny. He thought of Aurelia's hands. Last night, those same slender fingers had unbuttoned Cashin's shirt. He felt himself being lifted, handled, moved, weightless and lost like a dead leaf floating on a storm-tossed sea. And then, the memory of the pool slammed back into him. The water filling his lungs. The scratch of burlap against his skin. The sickening pressure in his chest. But nothing compared to her words. "You touch my man, you pay the price." Every syllable a dull knife, carving his heart open piece by piece. In his final moment of lucidity, Julian heard it. His own laugh. Croaked. Wet. Broken. How ironic. The ribs she'd shattered herself, were now slicing into his lungs. She used to promise she'd never let him get hurt. And yet, no one had hurt him more than her. Above him, the cabin lights flickered. Evelyn's blouse clung to her skin, soaked in sweat. She could feel it, this stranger was slipping away right under her hands. She didn't know why, but she couldn't walk away. A flight attendant leaned in and whispered, "Doctor, should we prepare for an emergency landing?" Before Evelyn could answer, Julian's body convulsed violently. She pinned him down, turned to the crew, and said, "Call ahead. Have an ambulance waiting. He has multiple fractures and internal bleeding. He'll need." Suddenly, her wrist was seized. His eyes, clouded and glassy, suddenly sharpened. And in that fleeting moment, Evelyn saw something terrifying. Not panic. Not confusion. Resolve. "Don't, hospital," Julian gasped. Each word bled out with pink froth. "Please." Evelyn froze. And against every protocol, every instinct, she nodded. "I have a private facility outside the city," she said quietly. He woke to the sharp scent of antiseptic. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting soft lines across the pale bedsheets. Julian stared at the ceiling, dazed, uncertain whether he was still alive or drifting in some fever dream. Then a voice came from beside him, calm and clear. "You're awake." He turned abruptly, only to meet a pair of steady, composed eyes. The woman standing beside him held a medical chart. She closed it with a soft click, then glanced at him with clinical ease. "You lost consciousness on the plane from internal bleeding. I performed emergency stabilization. How do you feel now?" Julian instinctively reached for his abdomen. The pain had dulled, no longer sharp, just a muted ache pulsing beneath the skin. He opened his mouth. His voice cracked. "Thank you." She gave a small nod and handed him a cup of warm water. "My name is Evelyn. I'm a doctor. This is my private convalescent clinic. You're safe here." Julian's fingers curled around the mug, absently running along the rim. The warmth grounded him. After a pause, he lowered his eyes. "My name is George," he said softly. Julian stayed at the clinic. Evelyn came by daily to check on him, but never asked anything beyond medical necessities. She didn't pry. She didn't guess. Until one day. A nurse accidentally dropped a tray. Metal instruments clattered to the floor with a sharp clang. Julian flinched hard, curling in on himself, arms instinctively shielding his ribs. Evelyn froze mid-motion. Her gaze swept over him, at the defensive posture, the fading bruises on his wrists, the phantom wince in his spine. "These wounds," she said quietly. "They weren't caused by an accident." Julian's breath caught. But Evelyn didn't press him. She simply reached forward and gently pulled his shirt back into place, her voice calm as ever. "If you don't want to talk, you don't have to. But if you need it, there are lawyers. Police. People who can help." He gripped the bedsheet in his fists. And shook his head. Evelyn said nothing else. She turned to leave. Just as she reached the door, his voice stopped her. "Thank you." She looked back. A faint smile flickered across his pale face. Thin. Tentative. Real. "But I'll be okay," he said. "Really." Days passed. Time blurred into quiet. The air at the clinic was so still, it felt like a world untouched by consequence. Julian's body healed slowly. His silence became less brittle. Sometimes, in the afternoons, he sat in the garden, letting the sun warm the places that no one could touch. One day, he passed the conference room. Inside, Evelyn's voice rose in clipped frustration. "They're holding firm on this valuation. It's absurd. But market data clearly shows their estimates are overinflated by at least 30%. Julian paused. Then, without meaning to, he pushed the door open. All eyes turned to him. Evelyn's brow creased slightly. "George?" He hesitated. Then pointed to the projected slide, a financial report mid-presentation. "The cash flow forecast on page 3 is wrong," he said quietly. "They're concealing a portion of their debt. If you factor it in, your offer should be revised up by 15%. Silence. Total. Evelyn stared at him for a long moment. Then, she slid the report across the table. "Keep going," she said. The next morning, Evelyn slid a contract across the desk. "The acquisition went through. If you're interested, I'd like to offer you a position, strategic advisor to my firm." Julian stared at her for a beat, then let out a low chuckle. "Aren't you worried I'm a corporate spy?" Evelyn leaned casually against the table. Her gaze was steady, voice calm. "I looked into your background, naturally, I found absolutely nothing. But my gut tells me you're someone I can trust." In the hospital's VIP suite, the sterile scent of disinfectant had been overtaken by the sweetness of lilies blooming on the bedside table. Aurelia sat by the bed, holding a steaming bowl of herbal medicine. The silver spoon clinked gently against the rim with every stir. "Cashin," she coaxed, lifting the spoon toward his lips, "just one more sip. I spent 4 hours simmering this." Cashin, pale and composed, hid a flicker of amusement. He drank obediently from her hand, his long lashes casting delicate shadows under the soft hospital lights. "Aurelia," he murmured, "if you stay here with me this much, won't Mr. Ashbourne?" "He won't mind," she cut in, a little too quickly. Her tone was firm, but it rang hollow, as if she were convincing herself. Julian's the most understanding person I know. She set the bowl down. But as the spoon tapped the edge of the glass coffee table with a sharp ding, something about that sound pierced her skull like a needle. It had been 3 days. 3 full days since she last heard from Julian. She pulled out her phone. The lock screen still showed his peaceful sleeping face. 17:03, I'll be home late. 22:47, are you still mad? Next morning 9:15, Julian, pick up. The last message was from this morning. I need to make a call, she said abruptly, standing so fast her chair toppled backward. At the far end of the corridor, Aurelia stepped into the emergency stairwell and dialed for the 3rd time. The mechanical voice on the other end repeated coldly in both Chinese and English, "The number you've dialed is currently unavailable." The sound echoed off the concrete walls in a chilling loop. She called Gavin next. "I need you to check the house," she said after a moment's pause. She didn't say she was worried about Julian. Only that she needed confirmation the security system was functioning. Half an hour later, Gavin sent his report. "Ms. Kingsley, the home security logs show everything's normal. It's just that." "Yes," she pressed. "The kitchen disposal hasn't been activated in 3 days. The smart assistant's logs show the last time it ran was the day you left." Aurelia's breath hitched. Julian had obsessive cleanliness standards. He would never, never, leave food waste overnight. The fingerprint lock beeped. The entryway lights flicked on automatically. But beyond the door, nothing. No welcoming glow, no faint hallway lamp. Just darkness. Complete and silent. "Julian?" Her voice echoed through the vaulted living room, bouncing off the walls like a question already answered. No response. The faint scent of roses that used to linger in the air was gone, replaced by a chilling, vacant stillness. Aurelia stood frozen at the threshold of the master bedroom, heart thudding unnaturally fast. Panic crept in, silent and sure, crawling up her spine. She slowly pushed the door open. And her breath caught. The wardrobe stood wide open. Every one of his clothes, gone. On the dresser, his cologne, sunglasses, all his usual items, gone. The framed photo that used to sit by the bedside? Vanished. Only the frame remained, bare and abandoned. Something dropped inside her chest. She rushed to the study, flung open the drawer. His passport, ID, bank cards, everything that proved his existence, had disappeared. All except for 2 things. Sitting silently on the coffee table. A necklace. And a stack of yellowed love letters. With trembling fingers, Aurelia picked up the necklace. It was the one she gave Julian on his 18th birthday. He had worn it ever since, never once taken it off. And now, he was gone. The necklace left behind like a punctuation mark. Refusing to believe the worst, she snatched her phone and dialed Gavin. "Find out where Julian went, now. Use every connection we have. I don't care what it takes, dig the whole goddamn world up if you have to." "Yes, ma'am." Typing sounds crackled through the line as Gavin went to work. Time stretched unbearably thin. Finally, Gavin's voice returned, hesitant. "Ms. Kingsley. Mr. Ashbourne's identity records have been erased." Erased. Julian had voluntarily vanished. But why? What had happened while she was gone? Aurelia's hands curled into fists, her knuckles bone white. The sharp sting in her palm snapped her back. The necklace. Right. The necklace had a microcamera. It might have captured something. She ran to the study, pulled up the feed. And froze. The footage filled the screen, grainy but unmistakable. Cashin stood at the edge of the diving platform, a cruel smile curling his lips. A burlap sack squirmed at his feet. The fabric slipped. A face appeared. Blood at the corners of his mouth. Pale skin. Disheveled hair. Julian. He was staring toward the camera, toward her. His lips trembled, as if forming words. Then her hand, her own hand, came into frame, shoving him over the edge. Crash. The sound of water breaking roared in the silent room. In the surveillance chamber, Aurelia could hear nothing but a high-pitched ringing. Her fingers clutched the necklace like a lifeline, nails digging deep into her skin. Her throat burned with the taste of metal and disbelief. Suddenly, something clicked. Aurelia's fingers froze mid-motion on the video timeline. She rewound. Slowed the frame. Cashin's smirk came into view, calculated, venomous, almost taunting her through the screen. She stared at the face that once seemed so familiar, now distorted beyond recognition. Her breath grew sharp and shallow. Then her phone rang again. Ms. Kingsley, the hospital just. She cut Gavin off mid-sentence. Bring the car around. Her voice was barely human, a raw rasp scraped from the inside of her throat. I'm going. Now. The car tires screeched against the pavement. She played the final voicemail. Don't worry, she can't trace it. I wiped that bitch's medical records clean. Took care of the security footage in the villa too. He should have known better. He brought this on himself. Each word landed like a poison dart. Each syllable tore through her remaining illusions like shrapnel. The hospital door flew open with a crash. Cashin looked up, startled. His phone slipped from his hand and hit the tile with a sharp crack. Aurelia? What are you? You knew it was Julian. Her voice was nothing but gravel and rage, low and lethal. Like something that had clawed its way back from hell. Cashin went white. His fingers clawed at the bedsheet. I don't know what you're talking about. The man in the sack. She lunged forward, seizing his wrist. The grip was brutal, bones grinding under her fingers. You knew it was him. Didn't you? Tears burst from Cashin's eyes. You're hurting me. Answer me, she screamed. Her eyes were bloodshot, feral. I just. He broke down, the words tumbling out in broken sobs. I loved you. I was scared he'd take you from me. I didn't know what else to do. Her expression twisted with something close to revulsion. She let go of his wrist like it was something filthy. Her eyes flicked across the room. Then settled on the fruit knife resting on the bedside table. The metal blade caught the overhead light. Reflecting her face. Twisted. Unrecognizable. Eyes wild. Cashin saw it too. And panic snapped across his features. You can't. He scrambled backward. The 4-pole crashed to the floor behind him. The light in Aurelia's office was stark and cold, casting sharp edges on every surface. Her desk was buried under a chaos of documents, papers splayed wide like wounds torn open. Some of them detailed, in excruciating clarity, how he had manipulated and sowed distrust between her and Julian for months, perhaps years. But the worst were the reports, delivered discreetly by her private investigator. Photos. Audio files. Bank transfers. Testimonies. It was Mr. Vale who hired us. Said we just had to put on a show. The money was good. Told us to fake an attack. Just make it look real, he was never actually in danger. Said if Ms. Kingsley bought it, there'd be a bonus afterward. Aurelia's knuckles whitened around the edge of the desk. Her chest rose and fell in tight, shallow waves. Something raw flickered behind her eyes. It had all been Cashin. A performance. From start to finish. And she, blinded, reckless, desperate, had helped cast the man she loved into hell. When Cashin was invited into the office by Darius, he still wore that affable smile, the one that had fooled her too many times before. "Why the rush? You called me." Before he could finish, a stack of papers slammed against his face with a dull, violent thud. "Explain." Aurelia's voice was glacial. The pages scattered across the marble floor like a blizzard of truth. Cashin looked down and caught sight of the damning images, photos, financial trails, names. His smile cracked. I can explain," he stammered, sinking to his knees to collect the documents, fingers trembling. This is a setup. Julian must've, he's always hated me, he's framing me." "Julian?" Her tone was too calm. It was the kind of calm that came before a storm leveled cities. She reached into a drawer and placed a recording device on the table. Pressed play. That little bastard deserved it. He should have known his place. Cashin's voice filled the room, sharp, venomous, unmistakable. He went pale, almost translucent. Still, he forced a smile, a grotesque imitation of charm. He shoved the files aside and took a slow step toward her. "You have to believe me. I didn't mean any of it. I love you. You know I love you." Aurelia didn't move. She just stared at him, ice pooling in her gaze. "You love me?" Her voice dropped to a whisper, thick with contempt. She reached forward and gripped his jaw, hard enough to bruise. "You do this, and still dare call it love? Doesn't it make your skin crawl?" Cashin froze. But only for a second. Then his mask shattered. His eyes darkened, voice rising from somewhere twisted and broken. "Oh please, don't act like you're some saint." He jerked his chin free, eyes burning with rage. "You came to me. You used me. You made me think I mattered. Made me think you felt something." He backed away, flinging a hand toward her face like a curse. "You're no better than me. Don't stand there pretending. Julian left you. He gave up everything just to get away from you. He'd rather vanish off the face of the earth than look at you ever again." Aurelia's pupils contracted. For a split second, the world fell out from under her. And her heart, crushed under the weight of his words, forgot how to beat. Cashin's laughter turned cruel, his tone laced with venom. "You know what he left behind, don't you?" he sneered. "That necklace, that was your gift, wasn't it? You saw the surveillance footage. Every blow, every hit." He leaned in, eyes gleaming with twisted satisfaction. "Each one was delivered by your own hand." Silence gripped the room like a vice. Then Aurelia laughed. Soft. Controlled. Chilling. She stood slowly, one graceful movement at a time, and walked toward him with unhurried poise. When she reached him, she rose onto the tips of her toes and gently cupped his face, like a lover might. But her eyes were glacial. "You're right," she murmured. "I was blind." Her hand fell away. Her voice dropped lower. "And now, it's time to fix that mistake." Before Cashin could process her words, the office doors swung open again. 2 security guards strode inside. Without a word, they seized him. Coarse ropes wrapped around his arms and torso with brutal efficiency. Cashin gasped, stumbling as he struggled against the pressure. "You can't do this. I'll give the money back, I'll pay it all back." Aurelia stepped back and watched him, calm, detached, as metal cuffs snapped around his wrists. "Money?" she said flatly. "You think I care about money?" She leaned in close, her lips nearly brushing his ear. Her whisper was razor sharp. "I'm going to teach you what it means, to wish you were dead." The corridor of the psychiatric hospital was silent except for the soft hum of the fluorescents overhead. Aurelia's shadow stretched long across the sterile tile as she stood motionless, clutching a thick folder in her hand. Inside were records. Every sin. Every betrayal. Every crime Cashin had committed over the years. Embezzlement. Corporate fraud. Assault. And most damning of all, his meticulous orchestration of Julian's downfall. She stepped into the room. The smell hit her first: antiseptic, sweat, decay. Cashin was curled in the far corner of the padded room, his face partially obscured by bandages, the aftermath of a recent self-inflicted wound. When he saw her, his eyes lit up with pitiful hope. "You came," his voice cracked. He dragged himself forward, knees scraping the floor. "You came to save me?" He collapsed mid-crawl, too weak to hold his own weight. Still, he reached out with dirty, shaking fingers and clutched the hem of her skirt like a drowning man grabbing driftwood. Aurelia didn't flinch. She crouched down slowly, calmly, and looked him square in the eye. There was no pity in her gaze, only the vast, freezing quiet of contempt. "Do you know why I came here?" she asked, her voice low and even. Cashin trembled. He shook his head, tears spilling down his cheeks. I know I was wrong," he whispered. "I swear I know now. Please." "Wrong?" Her laugh was cold and mirthless. She tossed the folder onto the floor between them. It landed with a dull slap, papers spilling across the tiles. "Is this what you call knowing you were wrong?" Cashin's eyes flicked down to the topmost page, and the blood drained from his face. Cashin thrashed his head violently from side to side. "No. I didn't do any of this. Someone's framing me." He crawled forward, desperate, his voice cracking. "Aurelia, you have to believe me, you have to." "Framing you?" Aurelia crouched and clamped his jaw with one hand, her grip vice-like, fingers digging into bone. "You really think I'd believe another one of your pathetic lies?" She released him with a sharp jerk, pulled a handkerchief from her coat, and wiped her hands slowly, deliberately, like brushing off filth. That single motion pierced through Cashin's delusions like glass. His pupils shrank. Then, without warning, he lunged at her. Aurelia didn't flinch. Her heel drove into his chest with brutal precision. He collapsed backward, howling, unhinged. "You can't do this to me," he screamed. "I loved you. Everything I did it for you." "For me?" Her tone turned glacial, her eyes hollow with disgust. "You destroyed everything Julian and I ever had. You turned love into a weapon. You call that love?" She stepped back, turned toward the door, and gave a small nod to the doctor standing outside. "Effective immediately," she said coldly, "I'll be overseeing his treatment plan myself." The doctor entered with a file in hand. Aurelia flipped it open. The top page read: "Patient number 0487, treatment directive, electroconvulsive therapy, pharmaceutical sedation, permanent confinement." Cashin screamed and fought against the invisible walls of his padded cell. "No! You can't do this to me. Aurelia, I curse you. I curse you to never earn Julian's forgiveness." She didn't look back. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing his cries inside. Out in the corridor, Aurelia lit a cigarette, the smoke curling around her face as her gaze drifted toward nothing in particular. Her assistant approached cautiously. "Miss Kingsley," he said quietly, "as per your instructions, his assets have been frozen. His parents are under travel restriction, they won't be able to contact Mr. Vale." Aurelia gave a curt nod. "Leak his embezzlement records to the press," she said. "I want his name scorched into the earth." The assistant nodded and stepped away. Aurelia crushed the cigarette beneath her heel and turned toward the darkened window. She knew this was nothing, compared to the pain Julian had endured. But it was a beginning. At least now, Cashin would never again have the chance to hurt anyone. Later that night, she stood alone outside the house she and Julian once shared. The home they'd built a life in. Laughter. Wine. Dreams. Now silent. In her hand was the same surveillance footage she had replayed 100 times, until she could see it in her sleep. But Cashin had wiped it clean. No usable data. No trail to follow. "Keep digging," she said hoarsely, eyes bloodshot with exhaustion. "Turn Northgate upside down if you have to. I don't care what it takes, find him." Gavin trembled as he handed her a new report. "Miss Kingsley. Ashbourne's identity has been fully erased. No passport. No travel records. He's gone off the grid." Aurelia's fingers curled into a fist. Her knuckles turned white. She burned through every connection she had. Pulled every string. Offered a bounty so outrageous it made headlines. But Julian had vanished. Gone, like smoke through her fingers. She retraced every place they'd once been. Their high school campus. The amusement park where he'd won her that ridiculous plush bear. Even the quiet foreign town where he studied abroad. Each time, she left empty-handed. And then the dreams began. Julian, standing ankle-deep in blood, his eyes cold, unforgiving. "You're the one who pushed me into hell." She would jolt awake, drenched in sweat, chest heaving, her heart clawing at the inside of her ribs, as though trying to tear its way out. Nothing else mattered anymore. She abandoned her company. Her empire ran on autopilot. Instead, Aurelia lived in airports. She boarded flights on a whim, chasing rumors, chasing ghosts. Chasing him. 3 months later, she found herself standing in front of a luxury bridal boutique on Fifth Avenue. Her gaze drifted to the dress in the display, clean lines, no lace, no gemstones. Just white, pure, elegant, timeless. Julian once said that's the kind of wedding he'd want. Nothing flashy. Just simple and true. Her mouth curled in something that might have been a smile, or maybe just a wince. But the past had collapsed like seafoam. Now, she didn't even know if he was alive. Then she saw him. Or thought she did. A flash of golden blonde hair. Tall frame. That unmistakable way of walking, like he didn't belong to the world, only passed through it. Her breath caught. Without thinking, she broke into a run. Julian. The man didn't turn around. She quickened her pace, reaching out, just inches away from his wrist. When a black car slid to a stop in front of him. The door opened. A woman in a fitted violet gown stepped out. She wrapped her arms around him, rose on her toes, whispered something into his ear. He chuckled softly. Then turned his head. The face wasn't Julian's. Just a stranger with a similar back. Aurelia stood frozen, hand falling limply to her side. Her throat tightened. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. "Miss Kingsley," her assistant murmured on the line, "the gala is about to begin. Should we?" She ended the call without answering, turned, and walked away. She never saw it. Inside a quiet corner cafe, behind the tinted glass, Julian set his coffee down and looked up, watching her silhouette recede into the crowd. Evelyn followed his gaze. That was her, wasn't it? Julian didn't speak right away. Then, finally, he nodded. He stood and reached for Evelyn's hand. "Come on. We've got a party to get to." He stood in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting the diamond stud in his left ear. A faint, unreadable smile touched his lips. Evelyn appeared behind him, handed him a champagne flute. "Aurelia will be at the private reception tonight," she said casually. Her voice had a soft edge to it. "You've been watching her since this morning. Tell me, was this really just business?" Julian turned the glass slowly in his hand, fingertip tapping the rim with a soft, clear chime. "You think too much," he said. And then he smiled again, cool, careful, unreadable. The gala glittered beneath a canopy of chandeliers. Light fractured through crystal, casting 1,000 shards of brilliance across the room. Julian held a flute of champagne in his left hand, deep in conversation with a cluster of French fund managers. He spoke with elegant command, fluent French, razor-sharp insights, and a presence so composed it drew attention like gravity. Across the hall, Aurelia stepped into the venue. Her eyes instinctively locked onto a tall figure ahead of her. Even from behind, the man's every movement radiated a familiar intensity, calculated, purposeful, dangerously controlled. She narrowed her eyes. Just as she was about to approach, the man turned slightly, brushing past her. A delicate whiff of rose trailed in his wake. Aurelia whipped around. But he was already gone, swallowed by the crowd. She seized the nearest waiter. Who was that man just now? Her voice was taut. The waiter offered a polite smile. That's Mr. George, the founder of JNA Group. A rising force in the investment world. Her breath hitched. JNA. The initials struck her like a chord. Julian. Anne. She whispered it aloud. JNA Group. She didn't dare believe it. And yet. A trembling kind of hope rooted itself in her chest. Julian was back. It was the third time Evelyn had caught Julian poring over the Kingsley Corporation's reports with more than a strategist's interest. She stood in the doorway of his study. His frame was taut under the amber light of the desk lamp, and the pen in his hand slashed across the page with a precise, almost violent rhythm. It didn't look like analysis. It looked like dissection. Like he was carving up the anatomy of an enemy. Kingsley again? Evelyn walked in with a glass of warm milk, making sure her footsteps echoed softly on the hardwood floor. Julian's hand twitched, barely perceptible, and in one swift motion, he closed the folder. Routine prep, he said smoothly, accepting the glass. His lips curved into that immaculate smile. Getting familiar with a future rival. She didn't challenge the lie. Though over the past 3 months, he'd spent more time on Kingsley files than on any other firm. There were nights he never left his desk. Whenever she tried to bring it up, he deflected with practiced ease, especially after that one-sided encounter in Paris. Don't stay up too late, she murmured, placing the cup down. You've got an early briefing tomorrow. He nodded. But his eyes were already drifting back to the papers. She closed the study door behind her. As she walked away, she heard the sound of pen to paper again, soft, relentless, like the scratching of an old wound that refused to heal. At 3:17 a.m., a scream tore through the silence of the villa. Evelyn jolted upright. Her instincts kicked in before her thoughts did. She was a doctor, trained to respond first, ask questions later. The scream had come from Julian's bedroom. She didn't bother with slippers. She ran. Evelyn threw open the door, and her heart clenched violently. Julian was crumpled in the corner where the bed met the wall, his hands clamped around his own throat with white-knuckled force. His face was ashen, drained of all color. Cold sweat soaked through his pajamas, clinging to the sharp ridges of his back. His entire body trembled like a leaf caught in a storm. But what frightened Evelyn the most were his eyes. His pupils were dilated, his gaze unfocused, locked on something that wasn't there, something terrifying and invisible. George. She dropped to one knee in front of him, too afraid to touch him. Look at me. Can you hear my voice? No response. His breathing quickened, chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked jerks. His lips had started to turn blue. Acute PTSD episode. Evelyn recognized it instantly. She reached for his wrist, cold and slick with sweat, and gently placed his hand over her chest. Breathe with me, she said quietly. Feel my rhythm. Just follow me, nice and slow. She exaggerated each breath, letting her chest rise and fall in steady, deliberate waves. Under her palm, she could feel the uneven ridges of scar tissue encircling his wrist. 1 minute. 2 minutes. Julian's breath gradually fell into step with hers. His pupils began to focus again. When his eyes finally locked onto hers, he jerked his hand back like he'd been burned. "I'm fine," he rasped, voice barely audible. He tugged down his sleeve by instinct, hiding the scar. "Sorry. Just a nightmare." Evelyn didn't challenge the lie. She simply rose, walked to the counter, and poured a glass of warm water. Without a word, she added a few drops of calming essential oil into the diffuser nearby. "Here. Drink this." She handed him the glass, careful to maintain a safe, neutral distance. "I'll grab a dry towel." When she returned from the bathroom, Julian had moved. He now sat on the single chair by the window, cradling the glass in both hands, his gaze drifting through the darkness outside. Moonlight traced the edge of his face, softening his profile. His lashes cast faint shadows beneath his eyes. Evelyn draped the towel gently over his shoulders, then took the opposite armchair. "You want to talk about it?" she asked, her tone casual, like discussing tomorrow's weather. Julian's thumb circled the rim of the cup, absent-minded. Silence stretched long and taut between them. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Do you know what drowning feels like?" Evelyn paused, startled. "First the water floods your nose," Julian whispered, as if recounting someone else's pain. "It burns. Like fire crawling up your sinuses. Then your lungs start to seize. You try to breathe, but all you get is more water." He looked up. "The worst part isn't the pain. It's knowing, with absolute clarity, that you're slipping away, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Evelyn noticed his left ring finger. It was twisted at a strange angle, permanently misaligned, a deformity left behind by a break that had never healed right. Julian suddenly stood up. He walked to his desk and opened the bottom drawer. From the very back, he pulled out a weathered manila envelope and held it out to her. "You should see this." Evelyn took it. It was heavier than she expected. She emptied the contents onto the table. A stack of photographs. Medical records. And a coffee-stained photocopy of a marriage certificate, warped and peeling at the edges. "So this was your real Na?" The words died on her lips. Her eyes locked on one of the photographs. Julian, sprawled on the floor in a pool of blood. A brutal gash tore across his forehead. The carpet beneath him was soaked a deep, sickening red. She picked up a medical report. 3 fractured ribs. Comminuted fracture of the right index finger. Pulmonary edema. Her throat went dry. "This was," she began. "Aurelia's doing," Julian said quietly. Too quietly. "She's my ex-wife." He paused. Then his eyes drifted toward the blurred image of the ruined certificate. "No," he said, a bitter smile tugging at his mouth. "We were never actually married. Not on paper." He gave a short, humorless laugh. She thought the man in the sack was some thug who hurt her husband. She wanted revenge. He looked back at Evelyn. "But the man in that sack was me." Evelyn turned to the next page, a still frame from a surveillance video. A woman stood at the edge of a raised pool deck, shoving a man, his head covered, body bound in canvas, into the water again and again. Beside her stood a young man. Innocent face. A small, pleased smile on his lips. "Cashin," Julian said, pointing at the man. "Her real husband. On paper. Legally. And me?" Julian's laugh now sounded hollow. "I was the joke." Evelyn finally understood. This wasn't business rivalry. It wasn't some calculated corporate move. This was vengeance. Intimate. Visceral. Personal. So you're going to destroy her? It wasn't a question. Julian walked to the window. The moonlight stretched his shadow long and thin across the room. I'm going to show her what it means to lose everything, he said, voice low and controlled. To lose her company. Her reputation. Her. He stopped. No more words. Just silence. Evelyn moved to stand behind him. She didn't speak. She didn't reach for him. She simply stood there, quiet, still, present. She spoke softly. Revenge won't bring you peace. Julian turned on her, eyes ignited with a cold, hollow flame. Then what will? Forgiveness? Forgetting? He yanked down the collar of his sleep shirt. A deep, jagged scar slashed across his collarbone. She gave me this, he said, voice rising. With an iron rod. 99 strikes. She counted. Every single one. Evelyn stared at the scar. Then, suddenly, she pulled him into her arms. Julian froze. Then, like something inside him broke, he collapsed against her, all the tension draining from his frame. I'm not here to stop you, Evelyn whispered, her chin resting lightly against his chest. I just don't want to watch hate consume you. She took his deformed hand gently in hers, her thumb brushing over the damaged knuckles. These scars, they don't get to define your life. Julian didn't speak. But Evelyn felt it, his silent tears soaking through her shirt, warm against her skin. Outside, the sky began to pale. Dawn was coming. Evelyn looked down at the man in her arms, now finally still. And made a choice. Show me your plan, she said. Every detail. Julian lifted his head, eyes red and swollen, surprised. If this is what it takes to let go, Evelyn said, wiping his tears away. If this is the only way you can start over, then I'll help you. When the first rays of sunlight broke through the curtains, Julian was standing by the table, pointing at a Kingsley Group shareholder chart. His voice was hoarse, but clear. Focused. Papers covered the desk. Financial breakdowns. Legal loopholes. Strategic entry points. The morning light caught the edge of a ruined photocopy. The marriage certificate. Julian stared at it for a second. Then picked it up and dropped it into the trash. Julian stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of JNA Group's penthouse. The entire city stretched out beneath him, wrapped in early morning haze. The glass reflected his face. A shadow of a man holding a glass of wine. The dark red liquid swirled slowly in the crystal, catching the light. The same color as the pool of blood he'd once been left to die in. A knock came at the door. Julian didn't turn. Come in. His assistant stepped inside, handing over a crisp folder with both hands. Kingsley Group just dropped another 5%. The market's reacting poorly to Ms. Kingsley's recent decisions. Julian took the file, a cold curve tugging at his lips. Good. He flipped through the latest financials, fingers pausing on a line of figures mid-page. Aurelia had been quietly liquidating assets, plugging holes left by Cashin's embezzlement. Start dumping the rest of our Kingsley bonds, Julian said as he closed the folder. The assistant hesitated. Sir, if Kingsley collapses too fast, we'll take a hit as well. Julian looked up, his gaze sharp and gleaming. I don't care. He didn't care about profit or losses. Only that Aurelia watched everything she once clung to slip away. Just as he once did. At Kingsley Group headquarters, Aurelia sat frozen before her screen, eyes glued to the free-falling stock chart. Her phone buzzed constantly, board members, investors, media, but she slammed it into silent mode without looking. Find out who's behind this, she snapped at her assistant. Gavin's face was pale, sweat beading at his temple. We traced the sell-off. It's coming from a Swiss-based investment firm. Young company. Deep pockets. The real ownership is buried. Aurelia narrowed her eyes. What's the company name? JNA Capital. Her lips parted. JNA. Her mind reeled. Julian. The pen in her hand snapped, black ink bleeding across the contract she'd just signed. Her breath hitched. Was it him? Had he come back? Julian sat in a dimly lit private lounge, a glass of red in hand. Across from him, Andrew, the former CFO of Kingsley Group, shifted nervously in his seat. You said there'd be more, Andrew muttered, eyeing the check Julian slid across the table. Julian smiled faintly. That's your down payment. Finish the job, and the rest is yours. Andrew's eyes lit up at the number. He nodded quickly. Absolutely. Aurelia's desperate. She's about to mortgage the company's core patents just to calm the market. If I tweak the reporting a little. No. Julian's voice was soft, almost kind. But final. Andrew blinked. No? I want you to help her, Julian said calmly. Stabilize the stock. Ease the panic. Let her think she's in the clear. He sipped the wine slowly, eyes cold. And then, when she finally exhales. He set down the glass. One clean kill. The next morning, Aurelia stood in front of the market dashboard, staring at the stabilized stock price with a frown. Looks like Andrew brought in a few institutional investors, Gavin reported cautiously. Andrew? Aurelia's lips pressed into a thin line. And where the hell would he get those kinds of connections? Gavin shook his head. No idea. But the capital came through. It's bought us some breathing room, for now. Aurelia walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city bathed in a blanket of golden lights. Something felt off. Deeply off. Find out who these institutions are, she said, turning sharply. Her tone was flat. And do it fast. Outside, the night hung low and heavy, like the silence before a storm. Julian glanced at the new intel Evelyn handed him, chuckling softly. She's suspicious. As expected. Evelyn arched a brow. Time to tighten the net? Not yet. He folded the file and looked out the window into the quiet night. I want her to come to me. The way he once begged her to come back. Aurelia's instincts, it turned out, were painfully accurate. Just as Kingsley's shares had begun to level out, the same institutions that had invested suddenly pulled out en masse, like it had all been choreographed. The stock plummeted. Hard. To an all-time low. Aurelia stood before the glass wall of her office, fists clenched so tightly her knuckles went pale. Behind her, Gavin barely dared to breathe. Where's Andrew? Gone, Gavin whispered. He's completely off the grid. A dense silence filled the room. Gavin wiped at the sweat streaking down his temples. He knew what was coming, and he knew what it might cost him. Did you find out who those investors were connected to? Aurelia didn't turn. Gavin swallowed, then slowly placed the file on her desk. They appeared to be from different firms. But after tracing it back, every single one of those companies is owned by JNA Group. Aurelia stood still for a long moment. And then, strangely, she exhaled, like she'd expected this. Julian. It had to be him. She'd been standing outside JNA Group headquarters for 3 days. Her tailored blazer was wrinkled, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Every time she requested a meeting, the receptionist declined her with polite, impenetrable distance. Every time she tried to get past security, they blocked her, tense and alert. But today she'd had enough. Move, she said in a voice so low it scraped the floor. Before the guard could react, Aurelia shoved him aside and strode toward the elevators. Today, she would see Julian. No matter what. The door to the top-floor office slammed open. Julian sat facing the window, back to her, drawing a sharp line across a document with his fountain pen. "Miss Kingsley," he said calmly, not even turning around. "You're trespassing. I could call the police." Aurelia froze. That voice. The voice she'd heard in countless dreams, now right in front of her, yet colder than any stranger's. "Julian," her throat was raw as she stepped forward. "I know it's you." Julian finally turned. Sunlight poured in behind him, casting a golden outline around his tall frame. He looked more striking than ever, nothing like the man who used to hold her and whisper that he loved her. That version of him was gone. "George," he corrected flatly, tapping a finger on the nameplate on his desk. Aurelia's chest heaved. "I know the truth about Cashin," she said, stepping closer, both hands braced on his desk. "It was him, he orchestrated everything. He manipulated me. I really thought that man in the sack was someone you hired to hurt him." Julian stared at her, emotionless. Her voice faltered. "If I'd known it was you, I would have never." "Never what?" Julian suddenly laughed. "Never pushed me off the platform yourself? Never cracked my ribs with a metal rod? Or never crushed my fingers under your heel?" He picked up a remote and clicked it. A projector screen slowly unfurled behind him. On the screen, the sack tumbling open, revealing Julian's bloodied, ghost-white face. Aurelia watching coldly. Cashin smirking in the background. Then came the swing of the iron bar, Julian's body curling inward, a muffled gasp of pain. Aurelia went pale. "Shall I keep going?" Julian rested his chin on his hand, voice casual. "I've got more footage. Like the one where you're cradling Cashin and making him call you husband?" Aurelia couldn't speak. She stared at his unreadable expression, then dropped to her knees. Her legs hit the floor with a harsh thud. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice shaking, fingers clutching the edge of his desk like it was her last lifeline. "I didn't know." Julian looked down at her. And for a moment, he almost laughed again. Aurelia Kingsley, the once unreachable queen of boardrooms, now on her knees before him like a stray dog who'd lost everything. Aurelia squeezed her eyes shut. After a long silence, she finally looked up. "What will it take for you to forgive me?" Julian opened a drawer and pulled out a document, sliding it across the desk toward her. "Kingsley Group Share Transfer Agreement." "Sign it," he said coolly. "I'll buy out every share you own, at market price." Aurelia froze. "You want Kingsley Group?" "No." Julian rose to his feet. The click of his shoes against the marble echoed crisply through the room. He leaned forward, tapping the document with 2 fingers. "I want you to hand Kingsley Group to me yourself," he said without hiding a shred of malice. "And then I want you to watch as I tear it down, piece by piece." Her trembling fingers brushed the edge of the contract. She understood exactly what it meant. If she signed, the company she'd built over years would no longer be hers. If she refused, she would lose the only chance to make things right. Julian studied her inner conflict with growing detachment. It didn't thrill him anymore. "I'll give you 3 days to decide," he said, turning toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette distant and cold. "But don't forget. You're in no position to negotiate with me." Kingsley Group, Executive Boardroom. The city glittered beyond the glass walls, lights gleaming like stars below. Julian sat at the head of the table, fingertips drumming softly on the surface. In front of him lay stacks of asset separation agreements, awaiting his signature. On both sides of the table, executives who once bowed to Aurelia now sat with heads lowered, breaths shallow, as if afraid to disturb his silence. "Sell off the renewable energy division. Fold the healthcare unit into JNA Group." His tone was calm, like he was reading a grocery list. As for the remaining shell, let it rot. The CFO hesitated. And the Kingsley brand? Julian's gaze lifted, his lips curling into a chilling smile. Kingsley Group? He stood slowly, the sharp clicks of his shoes again cutting through the silence like a metronome of doom. As of today, there is no Kingsley Group. He picked up the final document and slid it down the table to the silent woman at the far end. It stopped in front of Aurelia. Notice of reassignment, stamped across the cover. She would retain the title of CEO. But stripped of all decision-making authority. Required to submit daily reports directly to Julian. Aurelia stared at the document. Her fingers twitched, but she didn't reach for it. Julian looked at her and let out a quiet laugh. What's the matter, Miss Kingsley? Not satisfied? The room was dead quiet. Not a single breath dared to rise. Aurelia slowly looked up. The sharp, hawk-like eyes she once wielded with pride had dulled, like someone had drained the very life out of her. She sat in silence for a moment, then finally reached out, picked up the pen, and signed her name. Your daily report, Miss Kingsley. The secretary placed a file gently on her desk. Her voice was respectful, but her eyes held something else, pity. Aurelia opened it numbly. Kingsley Group Daily Maintenance Report. Inside, it detailed. Number of times the company signage was polished. Status of watering the office plants. Number of visitors received at the front desk, 0. She closed her eyes for a beat, then signed the bottom. It was Julian's requirement. She had to sign these reports herself, to prove that she was personally tending to the daily operations of what was now an empty shell of a company. Outdoor cafe. Julian carefully sliced the steak on his plate, the knife scraping against porcelain with a faint, precise ring. You still cut steak like you're dissecting an enemy, Evelyn teased with a soft laugh, smoothly taking his plate from him. Without asking, she began slicing the meat into small, even pieces. Like you're performing surgery on someone you hate. Julian raised a brow. Maybe I am. She slid the plate back toward him, letting her fingertips brush his hand. So, she asked. How does revenge taste? Julian gazed out at the lake. Sunlight shattered across the water in 1,000 glimmering flecks. More hollow than I imagined, he murmured. Evelyn studied his profile quietly for a while, then smiled. There's an astronomy exhibit tonight. Want to go? An astronomy exhibit? Her lips curved gently. You once told me that when you were a kid, your favorite thing was watching the stars. Julian blinked, caught off guard. He had said that, on a drunken night, long ago. He hadn't thought she'd remember. Planetarium, under the dome. Beneath the rotating projection of the Milky Way, Julian stared upward, mesmerized by the simulated galaxy drifting slowly above them. Evelyn stood quietly at his side, watching him instead of the stars. She leaned close, her voice brushing his ear. That's Altair, in Aquila, she said softly. Across the Milky Way, it faces Vega. They say they're lovers, separated by a river of stars. Julian gave a faint, bitter laugh. Sounds like a tragedy. But still, Evelyn whispered, almost like a secret, they find a way to shine toward each other every night, don't they? Julian turned to look at her, really look. Under the soft blue glow of the dome, her eyelashes shimmered like they'd caught stardust. He hadn't noticed before how long they were, or how close she now stood. Their distance vanished, as if drawn together by gravity itself. Julian. The name was torn from a throat, hoarse and raw. Julian turned abruptly. Standing at the bottom of the steps, pale and breathless, was Aurelia. Her eyes were bloodshot. And locked onto him. Aurelia's gaze locked onto their intertwined hands. Her chest heaved with ragged breaths. Who is she? The hallway lights in the planetarium were cold and sterile, casting a harsh glow on the scene. Julian leaned casually against the wall, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate care. "Miss Kingsley," he said lazily, "do I need to remind you that what you're doing right now qualifies as stalking and harassment?" Aurelia's fists clenched so tightly her knuckles cracked. "I asked you who she is." Julian gave her a cool smile. "Evelyn. My business partner, my girlfriend, maybe even my future wife, however you'd like to define her." "Wife?" The word cut through Aurelia like a blade. She lunged forward and grabbed his wrist. "We're not even divorced yet." Julian looked down at her hand gripping his arm. Then, slowly, he smiled, a smile so calm it bordered on cruel. "Divorced?" he echoed. "Aurelia, have you forgotten? Our marriage certificate was never real." He slipped his phone from his pocket and pulled up a file. Holding it up between them, the screen glowed coldly in the dim light. "Certificate of marriage nullification. Need a reminder?" He leaned in close to her ear, his voice a venomous whisper. "Your legal husband is still in a psychiatric hospital, remember?" Aurelia stumbled back a step like someone had sucked the air from her lungs. From the shadows behind Julian, Evelyn stepped forward. One hand tucked casually in her coat pocket, the other slipped around Julian's arm. Her tone was even, unbothered. "Keep harassing my boyfriend, and I'll be filing for a restraining order." Aurelia's eyes dropped to Evelyn's hand curled around Julian's arm, and in a flash, her mind pulled her back. Years ago. Under the cherry blossoms at school. She had stood in the exact same stance, bold and triumphant, holding Julian's hand and declaring to the world. "Julian's mine. Hands off." Now the roles had reversed. And this time, she was the one being warned. And only now did she truly understand what it meant, to have your insides torn to shreds by something you can't undo. Inside the car. Julian sat silently in the passenger seat, eyes watching the city blur past the window. Light streaked by like distant stars. Then he spoke. "Was I too harsh back there?" Evelyn kept one hand on the wheel. With the other, she gently laid her palm over his. "After everything she did to you," she said softly. "That wasn't even interest on the debt." Julian looked down at their hands, fingers layered together. And for the first time, he realized, revenge was no longer the only thing keeping him going. Above them, the sunroof slowly slid open. A sky of stars unfolded overhead. Evelyn's voice drifted in with the breeze. "Look. That's Vega." Julian tilted his head back, eyes locking onto the pinpoint of light. For the first time. The stars didn't feel lonely anymore. But just a few blocks behind them, cloaked in shadow, Aurelia stood frozen, her eyes locked on the car where Julian and Evelyn sat together. "So this is what you're doing," she whispered. "Trying to make me jealous, trying to make me beg." Her gaze darkened. Something in her expression shifted, hardening, deciding. She wasn't finished. Not yet. The rain came down in torrents. The concrete in front of the Kingsley corporate tower gleamed slick and black under the downpour, reflecting the red haze of streetlights. Kneeling in the rain, Aurelia's suit clung to her body, soaked through and heavy. Her long dark hair, now plastered messily across her forehead, streamed water down her face like veins of ruin. Her knees were buried deep in the cold flood pooling around the marble steps, but she kept her head high, unflinching, unyielding, her eyes locked on the one illuminated window on the top floor. She knew he was up there. "Julian. Please," her voice was shredded by wind and thunder. "Just see me. Just once more." The revolving glass doors behind her slowly turned open. Several security guards stepped out beneath black umbrellas. The lead guard stopped, staring at the kneeling woman in the storm. He sighed, almost pitying. "Miss Kingsley, if you keep this up, we'll have no choice but to remove you by force." Aurelia let out a broken laugh. Rainwater streamed from her chin. "Then let him come down and drag me out himself." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. One lifted his walkie-talkie to request instructions. A pause. Then a short, crackling reply. Moments later, a pair of them returned, hauling out a bucket. A silver flash. Aurelia gasped as a cascade of ice water poured over her, crashing down from above and soaking her already drenched body with a shock so violent it rattled her bones. Her lips turned blue in seconds. Her whole body shivered uncontrollably. At the top-floor window, Julian stood still, arms crossed, watching her through the glass. He tapped his finger against his earpiece and said flatly, "You think playing the victim works on me now?" His voice buzzed crisply from the lead guard's walkie-talkie. "Cruel. Icy. Precise. When you shattered my ribs," he said, "I didn't get the luxury of kneeling to beg for mercy." The next morning, Aurelia woke in the hotel suite, the hum of rain now just a memory. Her throat was sore. Her limbs burned. She sat up groggily, only to see her phone screen lit up with dozens of missed calls. All from her private banker. She returned the call with trembling hands. The man's voice on the other end was strained and professional. "Ms. Kingsley, I regret to inform you that your accounts have been frozen under international compliance measures. That includes your offshore trust and personal holdings." Aurelia's hand clutched the phone so tight her knuckles turned white. Julian wasn't just retaliating anymore. He was erasing her. No more Kingsley Group. No access to her funds. Even the hotel room she was in, she couldn't afford to pay for it anymore. A bitter laugh escaped her throat, rough, hoarse, like gravel caught in rusted gears. "You really won't let me crawl away with anything, will you?" Later that day, the Kingsley Towers auditorium was filled to capacity. The company-wide town hall meeting was in session. Julian sat at the head of the long table, fingers tapping slowly against the mahogany surface. Every eye in the room was fixed on him. "Today," he said smoothly, his tone almost playful, "we have a special presentation." He leaned back, smiling faintly as his gaze settled on the far corner of the room. "Let's welcome Ms. Kingsley, who will be reading for us a corporate writing sample." A rustle of whispers broke through the room. From the shadows, Aurelia stepped forward, paper clenched in her hands. The stack was old, yellowed and wrinkled at the edges, as if dragged from some forgotten archive. Her face was deathly pale. And her hands were shaking. It was a love letter. No, not just one, 20 pages of them. Aurelia had written them when she was 18. Every sheet soaked in the raw, unfiltered sincerity of first love. Julian's voice was calm, almost gentle. "Go on. Read it out loud. Let everyone here appreciate your writing skills, Ms. Kingsley." The room was deathly still. Aurelia's fingers trembled as she opened to the first page. "Julian, you wore a white shirt today. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might die." Her voice was dry, barely audible at first. By page 3, her throat caught, her Adam's apple bobbed violently. "When I turn 22, let's get married, okay? I'll love you for the rest of my life. Only you." Her voice cracked. But she didn't stop. She read every word. All 20 pages. By the end, her voice had worn down to a rasp. And the silence in the room was total. Some of the younger women had tears in their eyes. "Julian?" He smiled faintly. Then brought his hands together in a slow, deliberate clap. "Bravo." He tilted his head, gaze locked on her. "A brilliant performance. Shame it was all a lie." Aurelia looked up sharply. Something in her eyes shattered. The incident sent shockwaves through the company. Later that day, Evelyn burst into Julian's office, slamming a stack of papers onto his desk. The sheets scattered, on top lay a medical report. Patient, Aurelia Kingsley, diagnosis, major depressive disorder. Complications, gastric hemorrhaging. Look at this. Evelyn's voice was frigid. Keep pushing her, and she'll end up dead. Julian glanced down at the report. His fingers curled slightly, but the expression on his face didn't change. He took a sip of coffee, voice flat. So what? Evelyn stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed, but it was cold, humorless. So what? She echoed. Julian, when did you become this person? She stepped closer, heels clicking across the marble. Her fingers tapped the medical report, the dull sound landing like a warning. Stripping her of everything wasn't enough? Making her grovel like a dog every day wasn't enough? Her voice sharpened. You won't be satisfied until she collapses in an ICU? Julian's lashes fluttered. His coffee suddenly felt scalding hot in his hands. I didn't force her. He looked up. His eyes were glacial. This is what she deserves. Evelyn didn't blink. She leaned down, palms braced on the arms of his chair, caging him in. Then why won't you look at me? Julian froze. Her voice dropped lower, carrying something darker beneath the words. Tell me the truth, Julian. You haven't let her go, have you? Silence settled over the room like ash. Outside, rain struck the windows in rapid succession. A sound like time running out. Julian set down his coffee. The bottom of the cup made a soft click against the wood. I haven't. Julian finally spoke. The words were quiet, but they sounded like they'd been dragged out of him, raw and heavy. Evelyn didn't move. She remained inches from him, her body still blocking his in that tight space. Her eyes raked across his face, sharp and unflinching. Then why can't you admit it, she said. That you've gone too far? Julian's restraint snapped. He surged to his feet, so fast they were nearly nose to nose. Evelyn. You know what she did to me. You know what I know, she cut him off, voice suddenly gentler. But look at you now. What's the difference between you and the woman you swore to never become? That hit like a slap. Julian reeled back, chest heaving. She was right. When had he become this? Cold, calculated. Able to watch Aurelia wither day by day. Able to measure out her suffering with surgical precision, and worse, feel a kind of satisfaction in watching her fall apart. Wasn't that exactly what she once did to him? His throat constricted. He couldn't finish the sentence. Evelyn's expression softened. She reached out, her palm gently brushing his cheek. Hate burns hot, Julian. But hold it too long, and it'll turn you to ash too. Julian closed his eyes. A single tear slipped down his face. Bang! The office door burst open. Julian's assistant stormed in, panic written across her face. Julian. Kingsley's old team just joined forces with 3 private equity firms. They're launching a hostile takeover, they're buying up our floating shares. Julian straightened in an instant. When? 30 minutes ago. They've already acquired 12%, and they're still buying. She thrust a tablet into his hands. Here's who's leading it. On the screen, the former CFO of Kingsley Group. Now speaking to the press with a cold, triumphant smirk. JNA's acquisition tactics have always been questionable. We're just correcting the imbalance, taking back what's rightfully ours. Julian's hand curled into a fist. His nails bit into his palm. Andrew. The man he thought he'd flipped, the one who supposedly helped him bleed Kingsley dry from the inside. Call a meeting. Now, Julian barked. Start tracing the funds, find out who's backing them. Don't bother. Evelyn's voice cut through his command like a knife. Julian turned sharply. What are you saying? Evelyn's gaze was steady, her expression unreadable. Andrew was never on your side. Probably never on hers either. The most likely answer? She paused. He was always on his own. Julian froze. Then, slowly, his mind kicked into high gear. If that were true, then this wasn't about loyalty. It was about leverage. And suddenly, the boardroom battle he thought he'd already won, was about to become war. Julian suddenly grabbed his coat. Get the car. We're going to Kingsley Group. Evelyn frowned. What for? He didn't look back. To find Aurelia. When Julian pushed open the office door, Aurelia was standing alone by the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her frame looked so slight, almost like a shadow etched against the rain-streaked glass. She turned at the sound, surprise flashing in her eyes for the briefest moment before her face went blank again. What a surprise, she rasped. Didn't expect the CEO himself to come check on my performance. Julian strode directly toward her and shoved a tablet into her hands. Explain this. Aurelia's gaze skimmed the screen. Her brow furrowed slightly. I didn't authorize this. Andrew was your guy. Was, she replied, meeting his eyes head-on. Just like I was yours. Julian froze. The room felt smaller all of a sudden, thick with something unspoken. He held her stare for a moment, then exhaled hard. I want you to help me stop this. Aurelia blinked. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, streaks of water sliding down the glass like silent tears. Why? Her voice was almost a whisper. Julian hesitated, then gave an answer that surprised even himself. Because you're the only one who truly understands how Kingsley's old guard operates. It wasn't the whole truth. Half of Kingsley's former leadership still worked under him now. What he wouldn't admit, what he couldn't, was that the moment he'd seen her medical file, something inside him had cracked open. Aurelia studied him for a long time. Then, quietly, she smiled. There was no bitterness in it, just exhaustion, and something close to peace. All right. She turned, opened a drawer, and handed him a thick folder. This is a full map of Kingsley's old internal networks, and every piece of leverage I've ever kept on them. It'll be enough to dismantle their entire play. Julian opened it. His pupils narrowed. It was meticulous. Detailed. Precise. Clearly not something thrown together in a few days. You've been preparing for this. Aurelia didn't answer. She simply crossed the room and reached for her blazer. Let's go. While I still remember what it means to be Ms. Kingsley. Her back was straight. Her shoulders squared. For a moment, she looked like the woman she used to be, sharp, fearless, untouchable. Maybe this, helping him one last time, was the only thing she had left to give. In the Kingsley Group's main conference room, Julian slid the final stack of papers to the far end of the long table. Your severance payments have been processed. He glanced around at the room full of former executives, faces filled with disbelief, shame, and reluctant acceptance. As of today, Kingsley Group has nothing more to do with any of you. The CFO, voice shaking, finally spoke. We've worked here for 20 years. Julian tapped his fingers calmly against the tabletop. Which is why you're leaving with double compensation, he said flatly. Instead of ending up like Cashin, counting stitches on his face from inside a prison cell. Silence fell like a guillotine. In the corner, Aurelia sat motionless, her head bowed. Her suit still held the dampness from that stormy night. She hadn't said a word the entire time, like a hollowed-out shell with nothing left to lose. When the room finally cleared, she remained seated, unmoving. Julian closed his folder with a soft snap. Is there something else? Aurelia suddenly reached out, pressing her hand over the documents, her knuckles white with tension. Is there really no chance at all? His eyes dropped to her hand. A fresh cut traced across her skin, likely from breaking a mirror. It reminded him of a distant winter, when she'd climbed over the academy wall just to bring him strawberries. She'd scraped her hand on the wire and laughed, saying, "Doesn't hurt." Julian's voice came out quieter now, almost disarmed. You know what I thought about when I was tied up in that sack? I thought, if you turned around, even just once, looked at me, even just for a second. Aurelia flinched, her pupils tightening. But you didn't. He pulled the file away. So no. There's nothing left. Not even a thread. Evelyn's words echoed faintly in his mind. The best revenge is to forget. Julian turned and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Sunlight finally pierced the clouds, casting a soft golden glow across his silhouette. Days later, in his office, Julian stood in front of the vault, punched in the code, and pulled out a sealed envelope. He opened it, removed a single page of a stock transfer agreement, and signed at the bottom. Then, after a long pause, he reached for a small notepad. The pen hovered mid-air for nearly a minute. In the end, he wrote just 3 words. It's all settled. Aurelia received the envelope in her hospital bed. She was burning with fever, mind fogged and body weak. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The stock transfer agreement slipped out, landing across her lap. The sticky note, caught by a breeze from the window, fluttered through the air and came to rest lightly against her chest. Her blurred vision cleared just long enough to read it. It's all settled. And in that moment, her mind drifted back to a snowy evening at 20. Where Julian stood waiting for her with flushed cheeks and a red-tipped nose. Smiling as he whispered, "Aurelia, I waited. You came." But now, he wasn't waiting anymore. Outside, the first snowfall of winter drifted silently across the sky. Evelyn's car rolled to a stop in front of a stark white building on the city's outskirts. "I was going to wait until construction finished to show you," she said, opening the door for him. Her fingers trailed lightly across his palm, teasing. "But someone's been so obsessed with work lately, I had to schedule an appointment just to see you." Julian raised a brow. Was that a complaint? It was an indictment, she said with a grin, rising on her toes to nip playfully at his earlobe. "You've neglected me for 3 days and 7 hours. Inside, the lights were already on, washing the place in soft gold. Before he could take it in, Evelyn slipped behind him and covered his eyes. "Count to 3. In the dark, he heard fabric sliding. A rustle. Then. Now. As the black drape dropped, the inscription on the wall lit up under the spotlights. Julian Center for Trauma Medicine. All profits go toward PTSD and trauma recovery research, Evelyn whispered in his ear. Including those old injuries in your knee. His throat tightened. The scars she mentioned, ones he thought long forgotten, she had remembered them all. By what had to be coincidence, or maybe not, the lounge's floor-to-ceiling windows faced the old Kingsley Group headquarters. Julian was reviewing some intake data when a flicker of light danced across the ceiling. He looked up. Fluorescent blue letters, childishly curved, blinked against the far white wall. "Julian, the kite's stuck in the tree." He froze. It was a code phrase, one Aurelia invented when they were 16. The day she'd climbed a tree to untangle his kite, broken her arm, and still smiled through tears. "Don't cry, Julian. I swear it doesn't hurt." Across the street, on the rooftop of the Kingsley building, a thin silhouette leaned against the railing. A laser pointer in her hand shimmered faintly across the divide. Even from that distance, he knew it was Aurelia. She was wearing that same school jacket from when they'd first met, clinging to the past like a stubborn ghost. The laser danced again. New words shimmered onto the wall. This time, I'll catch you. Julian stared at it for 3 long seconds. Then, without a word, he rose and drew the curtains shut. The room fell into shadow. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Come to the lounge. Right now. His voice was steady. Unusually so. And bring the ring you hid in the second drawer of the locker room. There was a clatter on the other end, metal against tile. When did you find out? Evelyn's voice was breathless, shaken. Julian's fingers toyed with the faint sliver of light peeking through the curtain. He smiled, just barely. The day you secretly measured my ring size. Across the street, the laser beam was still trying to push through the fabric, casting a tiny pale dot on the floor, flickering with desperation. Julian stepped forward and placed his foot over the light. Outside, hurried footsteps echoed closer and closer down the hallway. Evelyn, he called out, voice firm now. I want you to walk in here and propose to me. Right now. The door burst open. She stood in the doorway, chest heaving, silk ring box clutched tight in her hand, eyes bright with defiant light. The laser blinked one last time near Julian's feet. Then died out for good. Julian's wedding was almost exactly how he'd once imagined it, not in grandeur, but in restraint. There was no elaborate ceremony, no scripted toasts or orchestrated spectacle. Just him, holding Evelyn's hand, standing atop a stargazing platform on the snowy crown of the Alps. Beneath them, only a dozen close friends clinked champagne glasses. The crystal chime mingled with the wind sweeping across the peaks, sounding like stars cracking open in the cold. I thought you'd want something bigger, Julian murmured, brushing a kiss across her fingertips. Evelyn kept her eyes on the sweep of the Milky Way. Only those who've been adored by crowds know how precious quiet can be. A butler appeared with a stack of wedding gifts. Among the gleaming parcels, one black and gold box stood out like a shadow among fireflies. Julian opened it, and Evelyn felt his fingers flinch, ever so slightly. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a medal, the same one Aurelia had once gifted to Cashin. The surface was worn smooth from years of being held too tightly. Attached was a card. 7 words. This time, I'm the one begging peace. Evelyn picked up the box and passed it to an aide without looking. Toss it. But Julian just laughed and set the medal gently on top of her bouquet. Could make a decent cautionary tale. In a locked ward of a maximum security psychiatric hospital, a wall-mounted TV flickered with scenes of the wedding. Cashin's skeletal fingers dug into the screen as if he could claw his way through. Blood welled beneath his split nails. He didn't seem to notice. She was my wife, he howled, hurling a glass across the room. Look at me. I'm younger than him, better looking, aren't I? A doctor watched in silence. Only when Cashin collapsed, spent and bleeding, did the orderlies move. They dragged him back to his cot like a carcass. Patient 0487, another psychotic break, a nurse muttered as she made notes. Self-harm count for the day, 7. Before she even finished writing, Cashin let out another scream, sending a mirror crashing to the ground. What is this? Who sent this? Who? He caught a glimpse of himself in the broken shards. A face once said to resemble Julian's, now ravaged, grotesque. Deep scars twisted across his skin, his right eye could no longer shut completely. The doctor didn't blink. Anonymous donation, he said. You're required to accept it. Cashin clawed at his own face until blood masked his reflection. He recognized the mirror. Carved into the brass frame was a single cruel line. Look at you now. Who do you still resemble? He hurled it against the wall. Glass exploded like shrapnel. Outside the barred window, a crow shrieked overhead, wings slicing through the cold sky, sounding like the laughter of something with no soul left to burn. Far across the world, in a dusty temporary clinic on the edge of the African desert, Aurelia knelt beside a child with a burn wound leg, her hands wrapping it with gauze. The sun blistered the back of her neck, peeling away skin that used to know perfume and pearls. Her suit was long gone, replaced by a wrinkled linen shirt stained with iodine and sweat. A little boy shyly offered her a dirty, half-melted candy. She blinked. For a second, she wasn't in Africa. She was 18 again. Julian had just dropped a strawberry hard candy into her textbook and winked. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the spell. Breaking news, JNA Group goes public. Valuation exceeds $10 billion. The lock screen glowed. A passing nurse gasped, startled. There, on the screen, was a teenage boy in a school uniform, standing beneath a tree, smiling over his shoulder, Julian, from another life. In Manhattan, fireworks exploded from the rooftop of the JNA Tower. IPO gift, Evelyn said as she wrapped her arms around Julian from behind, resting her chin between his shoulders. How's it compare to Aurelia's amusement park stunt? Julian turned and kissed her deeply. Not even close, he murmured. She blinked. No? You're 10 times better. Above them, fireworks shattered across the sky, their reflections burning against the glass of Wall Street's monolithic towers. The skyline blinked with promises, desire, conquest, legacy. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Only the woman in his arms. And the man he had finally become.